You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Batuta Advocate on Desert Rock FM. Welcome back to the Batuta Advocate radio show, recording live here in the Budgie Smuggler booth in downtown Batuta. And today's guest is zooming in all the way from Los Angeles, rather quiet part of the world right now.
As always.
I don't think there's too much going on over there. The American dream he's living, I believe. Matthew Reilly, thank you for joining us.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
One of Australia's favourite authors. How long have you been over there for?
I've been living here since the start of 2015, so it's getting on to nearly 6 years now.
How are you finding it over there? Is it much easier to write than back home here in Australia?
You know, it's about the same when it comes to the writing, but it's been enormous fun hanging out and meeting sort of movie directors and screenwriters of big action movies, meeting guys like Stuart Beattie, who is possibly one of Australia's greatest movie exports. He wrote Pirates of the Caribbean, and making friends in the movie world. It's been phenomenal.
I think every single person who's ever read one of your books from the very start until today always have that in mind. There's that kind of films. It's almost like you can translate it to film automatically reading your books. What was that ever on your mind when you first started writing, or you were just writing books?
I was born in 1974. I grew up watching 80s action movies.
Yeah.
And when I sat down to write the first book, actually the first two, Contest and Ice Station, I just thought, I want to read a book which has the action of a big 80s action movie.
You did that well.
And I wish I could say there was some higher purpose, but I was reading Tom Clancy or Michael Crichton, and they'd have like one action scene. And I thought, but the movies I watch have tons of action scenes. So I just started that way with Contest and Ice Station, and I'm a one-trick pony, and I'm doing my trick over and over again.
Well, it's obviously well known within the Matthew Reilly world that to write your first book, it was bumped back by a couple of publishers, so you decided to back yourself, and that was Ice Station. What made you think, this was worth having a punt on? Because it's obviously worked out for you.
Being young and stupid is sometimes an asset, and I was so naive, I thought, what could possibly go wrong? So I self-published that first book. I'd given that book, the first one, to some friends, and they read it, and I said, what'd you think? And one of them looked at me and said, this is really good. This, and he said, this reads like a real book. And I think he was sort of shocked that someone he knew might be able to write something which could be of professional quality. So sort of comments like that made me just think, go for it. What have I got to lose? I'll just have to pay the bank back the loan. So I did. It turned out to be a good decision.
So how many were in that original print run of Ice Station?
There were 1,000. There were 1,000 copies. They sell on eBay now for $1,500. I've only got them up on the shelf there. I've got about 6 copies left.
So
they were all in the back room of my parents' house at one point.
Yeah, is the story true where you were self-publishing and you'd listed your parents' landline as the number to get you?
That is correct. Here, hey, we got the video. Let me run and grab one here. All right, so this is not good for radio, but good for the podcast. So here I am. This is the book. It was actually a contest, but we don't worry about that. And first page, title page, copyright page, and yep, that phone number right there is still my parents' home phone number. Actually, even better, it's their address. I was living at home then. And yes, people have called.
So Pan Mac called there.
Yes.
Someone got a hold of that.
Dan McMillan.
Someone got a hold of Contest and said, all right, we've got to find this independent publisher. How come we've never heard of them before?
I think Kate Patterson, she was the commissioning editor at Macmillan, she's now the director of publishing. She has risen in 22 years to be the big cheese, and she's still my publisher to this day. I think she probably suspected it was self-published.
Yep.
But, as you can see from that, I made it look pretty schmick.
Yeah.
And the goal was to make it look like a real action thriller book. And that was the plan. I wasn't going to make my fortune self-publishing. I just did it to get noticed. Luckily, I got noticed.
So how?
I should mention to the self-publishers out there, only one publisher ever called me. Nobody else ever called.
So what inspired you to actually start writing? Because I know that there's a part in Stephen King's autobiography / the memoir on his own craft where he said for him, what spurred him on to write, his first book was the fact that he was reading stuff that he thought was, that he could do better than that.
Yeah, I've read
was
that.
Was that kind of the same for you?
Similar but different. I was looking at the stuff I was reading and I thought they're not doing something that I would like. And I wanted more action and I wanted more pace.
Yeah.
And I didn't want any rest breaks. And it's funny, so I feel my progression. I learned a lot with Contest. I think Ice Station was a real quantum leap up. Temple and Area 7 followed on at that pace. But then I did this book called Scarecrow. And Scarecrow, it had the hero of Ice Station and Area 7 in it. And Scarecrow, I set myself this goal of writing this mega-sized action scene at the start. And it was this scene in Siberia, and there's a typhoon submarine and a dry dock, and there's a building that explodes, and the helicopters and flying jets. And I said, everything after that scene has to get bigger. Mm-hmm. And Scarecrow, to this day, was this giant quantum leap up in my books. So, yeah, I'm sort of like, I know that Stephen King, I read that book he did on writing, and I looked at what I was reading and thought, they're not doing something which I'd like to read. And turned out a lot of people sort of are like me and like that too. I go to the movies a lot. I go to see the Marvel movies on the first weekend they're out.
Yeah, right.
I've seen all the Star Wars movies, but I was out watching, the Avengers, Infinity War and Endgame on the opening weekend in cinemas where people were cheering at the screen, and I love that stuff. That's sort of what I was trying to do in the books.
The closest thing I've seen on screen to your books, though, you almost out action filmed the action films, and the closest thing I think that they may have even been inspired by your books, but the closest thing I've seen to that is probably Fury Road. Just that, no one takes a piss from start to finish. It's just we're in a car and we're driving. Yeah, and
I agree. I was watching Fury Road going, that's the kind of movie I'd make.
Yeah, and the new Star Wars are a bit the same too. Like the most recent Star Wars, they're all a bit the same. But tell me, do you ever feel in writing these books, particularly early day when you were a young man writing, you were still at uni writing Ice Station, did you ever take a break, put the pen down and feel the same way that someone reading it would? Because we all remember kind of having a heart rate and almost a little bit a little bit out of breath reading your books. Did you ever feel that writing it?
Yes. all the time. Even this morning, I was writing my new book this morning, the one something, the last book in the Jack West series, and I just got exhausted. And I'm literally doing this today was part of. It'll take me about 2 weeks to write it. This is one of the biggest action scenes I've ever done, possibly the biggest. And I'm just exhausted at the end of it. I just have to go and sort of sit down on the couch, grab a beer, click on the TV, just stop.
Tune out for a bit. I figure
I'm a big believer right from the start that the energy I put onto the page is what leaps off the page to you when you read it. And if it's making you just go, oh my God, I need a break, and that's exactly what I'm after. I love hearing that.
So how long did the first book take to write? Wasn't 2 weeks, was it?
No. Oh, so it's a good question. Contest took 12 months to the day to write the first draft, and then months and months of revision. Nowadays, since I've been doing it for a while now, I can do a first draft in about 7 months.
Yeah.
And then I still revise it for another 5 or 6 months. Okay. So, and the revisions make it faster and faster. So it still takes a little over a year to do them, which is why I can't quite do one book a year.
Yeah. With your early days of your writing, obviously you're writing about, different countries and different paramilitaries and, guerrilla armies and stuff like that. Had you traveled that much at that point in your life? 19 years old, writing about, like, fuck it, the South Africans are the bad guys in this one. Like,
Yeah. So my experience with South Africa at that point was Lethal Weapon 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I know the one.
Diplomatic immunity.
Yeah.
So no. When I wrote the first bunch of books, Contest, Ice Station, Temple, New York City, Antarctica, Peru. I hadn't been to any of those. I was using Lonely Planets to figure out distances.
Yeah.
The first one I got to research and go to the country was Area 7. I actually went to Lake Powell in Utah and got on a boat and went around this artificial lake in the desert. And I've been fortunate since then, especially when you get into Seven Wonders and those books. I've been to the pyramids and Stonehenge and Easter Island, and that 18 months ago, living here in LA, I went to Mexico to Chichen Itza. Yeah. And these places are just... I tell anybody who wants to write a book, you don't have to visit a place to write about it. You can just go and research it, especially with the internet today. Mm. But you always get those little extra bits when you go. Back then, not a chance. I researched Ice Station entirely in Chatswood Library in the North Shore of Sydney. And I've done speeches there since. And it's so nice to tell the audience. I say, I researched this international best-selling book in this local public library. And they literally look around and go, man, that's awesome.
And it hasn't changed much either, I imagine, Chatswood Library, no.
Did you get to the end of your university course? I mean, that seems like quite a heavy extra workload on top.
I did. Yeah. I got my law degree, which I'm very, very glad I did. I think it's just good to have finished it. Yeah. But I've never practiced as a lawyer.
You're never admitted to the Supreme Court of New South Wales?
No. Although I do read the contracts that I sign with movie studios. Yeah. I sold one of my books to Disney, and the contract they got me to sign, it said all the things I couldn't do. I couldn't do keychains, calendars, fluffy toys, and they went through it item by item, all the things I could not do that I was selling to them. And on all of the movie deals, I had to guarantee that the book was my original work throughout the universe.
Right.
So I am stealing all my ideas from a guy on Mars, but until he gets here, that's legit. That is in the contract. That's in the contract.
Would you ever
the
make...
lawyer in me gets me to do that.
Yeah, right.
So would you ever make any Jack West Jr. keychains if you had the means?
I think, especially having watched the South Park special the other day, I think it'd be kind of fun to cheekily make some keychains and anything I ever sold to Disney. They ended up not making that one. That was Hovercar Racer. So the rights are back with me. So we might get some keychains done.
Get some keychains there.
Yeah. Remember the keychains. Keychains and calendars. That's what... Happy meals, I suppose.
When did the penny drop for you? I remember reading Ice Station and Contest, and then Scarecrow, and eventually we'd all hear about this local writer, this Australian writer. The first thing they say, which I guess kind of is the best way of explaining how big a book's gone, is how many languages it's been published around the world. Yeah. That's always a big one. Yeah. I remember hearing that, and that's when the penny dropped at how big the Matthew Reilly books were. When did you first figure out you'd sent something around the moon?
Ice Station was quickly sold. Macmillan in Australia snapped it up, and it was quickly sold to the US and the UK. And without getting into the weeds, Australia is a unique market because we speak and read English. Yeah. Most territories are done in their native language, but the US and the UK are the two biggest, and Australia is English as well. Yeah. There was a Frankfurt book fair around that time, and there was a German publisher who offered me, it was like, I forget the number, it was like 300,000 euros for Ice Station and Temple. And I hadn't even finished Temple at that time. It was like 3/4 finished. And that was for German rights. Right. And that was when the Aussie against the euro was like double points.
Yeah.
And off the top of my head, that was the moment where I was like, oh my God, I'm getting big money for a German edition of Ice Station and Temple. And I think that sort of really set it off, because the languages then went like dominoes. We did Dutch, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Thai, Japanese. The Japanese did a graphic novel of Ice Station. It's the only graphic novel in existence, and it's awesome.
I wonder how much they're going for.
Need to get a copy of that. Yeah.
Actually, I should put up some of the pictures. I would show the pictures from the Japanese graphic novel at speeches I would do.
Yeah, right.
And I'd put them up on a big screen, because nobody can get them. They sent me some, author copies, and it's amazing. It's got. You might remember there's a scene where Mother, the Marine, gets her leg bitten by a killer whale, and the killer whale actually rips it off. That is drawn in all its gory detail in the Japanese graphic novel of Ice Station.
Oh, that's great. And then where do you find your hotspots now? Obviously, you've sold to all these different, languages. We always ask this question to musicians. Silverchair had a massive following in Brazil. And I imagine,
is that right?
Yeah, I imagine Ice Station and your books have got some sort of pocket somewhere where they're real fans.
Yeah, two spring to mind. And it's kind of funny. Early in Holland, the Dutch editions were big sellers for me. And recently, God love him, there is a publisher in Bulgaria who is a huge fan, and they jumped onto Ice Station years ago, and every couple of years we get this email from this publisher in Bulgaria and says, listen, we're not a big market, but we love Matthew Reilly's books. Can we get the rights? And they pay me like $500 for the publishing rights in Bulgarian. And I can honestly say I am legitimately big in Bulgaria.
Have you ever been there?
No, I should. Don't tell the people in Bulgaria. This could be a scandal.
Like.
No, I haven't. No, I should.
Imagine a book tour through all the big cities in Bulgaria.
I think it would actually be surprisingly popular. Yeah. And I've done book tours in strange places. I've done signings in like London and in the Public Library in New York City. I did one in Singapore in the middle of the night in Changi Airport when all the people were going through. It was a midnight book signing. And
in the good terminal or the dodgy one?
It was the good one. It seemed good. But yeah, people walking by, honestly, I kid you not, geez, I haven't thought about this in years. You get an early crowd, people line up and they get their book signed, and then the crowd disappears and you get people wandering by and they see you sitting at this table with all these posters around it. And this dude sort of walks by. This is, again, 1 a.m., Changi Airport, Singapore. This dude's walking by and he sees me and he stops. He turns and he looks at me. And I'm sitting, all these posters with my name on it around me. He walks over to me and he leans in close and he goes, can you tell me where the restroom is?
The big who are you?
But I said to my publicist, I think the signing is now done. We're finished here.
So are there people from, all different walks of life coming to your book signings? Like from the ones that I've been to, there are quite a cross-section of humanity that are lining up at your table.
I would say it's very broad. If you had an event where there were, 300 people, I would say 90% are adults, pretty 50-50, men and women. Some might say the books seem more blokey, but a lot of female readers. And really only a small percentage would be teenagers. Yep. You get a few young kids, and that's a strange sort of phenomenon at what age kids jump into my books. And it's interesting that they are for adults, and it's adults who largely read them. But men, women, blue collar, white collar. Yeah, I think it's just people who like escapism.
It's interesting you said that about teenage boys, because teenage boys are definitely the target market for the movies. Young men, particularly with the diehards and the Lethal Weapons. So it must be something about the medium. Reading in itself is for everyone, as opposed to sitting down for 2 hours watching Bruce Willis.
Yeah. It's a strange phenomenon, and I could go on for hours, but it seems boys read until about the age of 12, and then they go off and play football and cricket, and girls keep reading, and you have to sort of get boys back at about age 19 or 20. And if there's one thing that I see a lot, and I get told a lot at the book signings, it's a 26-year-old guy who says, my mother or my father gave me one of your books, and now I'm back into reading. I hadn't read a book since high school. I hear that a lot.
When you visit, say, for a book signing in a country that you have either stigmatized or used as part of your story, what are the thoughts when you go, when it's an away game for you and you arrive in their country and you've previously written them up as, ethno-fascists?
Yeah, I've done successful book tours in South Africa. Fine, no problems. Great Britain. Fine, no problems. There have been some dastardly British villains. But there remains one, and it continues, and it's continued for a long time. The French. The French. There were French villains in Ice Station, which came out in 1998. And then again in Scarecrow, where I blew up one of their aircraft carriers. To this day, I am not published in the French language. I am published in every language around France.
Really?
Spanish, Italian, Dutch, German, obviously English. But so no, I've never had nobody's ever complained to me about being a villain in any of the books. But the French, by not publishing me,
it's a Cold War. It's a Cold War.
And so actually, it was so funny because all those early things we discussed before, that I'd seen this big deal in Germany, I sold all these rights to other languages, but the French consistently said no. And so after Ice Station and after Scarecrow, I did write a kid's book, Hovercar Racer, and I just made a gratuitously French villain for that one because I figured stuff them. I was never going to be published there anyway.
Let's double down here. Now tell us about the most recent book.
Yeah.
Two Lost Mountains.
Oh, Two Lost Mountains. It's so I mean, you hear behind me, you can see Seven Ancient Wonders. A few years ago, I decided to really jump into an Indiana Jones style series, and I created this sort of wonderful sort of archaeologist soldier hero in Jack West Jr. And he came out in Seven Ancient Wonders, and I thought I'll write a sequel. And I thought, how do I make people know it's a sequel? I'll call it The Six Sacred Stones, and it looks like we're counting down. And once you do that, you realize that a lot of readers have completion issues. And they were like, great, Matthew Reilly's going to count down 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that's now what I've done. So we've had 7 Ancient Wonders, 6 Sacred Stones, 5 Greatest Warriors, 4 Legendary Kingdoms, 3 Secret Cities, and this one is now the 2 Lost Mountains. And how to describe it, the stakes in a Matthew Reilly book have just got bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. And, at one point you're saving, a country, then you're saving, in Temple, you're saving the world. And with Jack West, basically the universe is about to collapse in a singularity. And so as we're in the 2 Lost Mountains, he has to find these 2 historic mountains, a part of a group called the 5 Iron Mountains. And unless he does a certain thing by a certain date, the universe is going to come in a big crunch and everybody's going to die. So the stakes are pretty high as this one begins.
It begins very hot off the tail of the last book. It's really when we get to the end of the one that you're writing now, I'm really expecting that to almost explode in my hands when we get to the end of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, what you're being very nice to say, Errol, is once I wrote the 4 Legendary Kingdoms and jumped into 3, 2, and 1, 3, 2, and 1 are really just one story.
Yeah.
And 3 Secret Cities sort of kicked off this race to what we call the Omega event, the collapse of the universe. And 2 Lost Mountains is like the middle, it's the darker one. It's the one where things are looking pretty bad.
Yeah.
And it all builds to the final book, the 1 something something, which, as you have successfully anticipated, The one something something is literally the whole 400-page book is a climax.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is a climax. So it's a long way of saying when I started, the Four Legendary Kingdoms kicked off the second half of this series, and 321 is essentially one story. And you're right there. You try not to leave people with cliffhanger. You try to leave them with a bit of an upbeat moment so they're ready to jump into the last one.
Well, every time I read one of your books, and I know that you'd really like to see one of these made into a movie, then you get about 4 or 5 pages in and then you're just like, well, that sounds expensive. Would you ever compromise on your action to get something turned into a movie? If a person came to you and said, love the story, just pick 2 of these big action scenes and maybe we can do them on the computer.
Yeah, no. Then they're not the right person.
Yeah.
And the special effects have become so good. I had an effects guy tell me he could do the entire hovercraft chase in Ice Station in a computer.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even know.
Yep.
Especially when you've got hard surfaces, dinosaurs and creatures and, the bear that attacked Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant. That's hard to do, but spaceships and vehicles are actually pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I mean, when it comes to film rights, it goes back to what we were saying before and what you just said. I write the books to be big, giant action movies, and that means they're going to be $100 million. I came close with The Great Zoo of China and Sony. They got a great screenplay done, and it was going to be expensive. It was going to be $120 million just at Blockbuster. And the screenwriter had kept all of my wild dragon action scenes, dragons against fighter jets and throwing pieces of freeway at buildings. And they hired a director, and then they parted ways with him. And once they parted ways with the director, the movie project foundered. So that's the way the business works. Yeah. I'm now increasingly getting offers for TV shows, and they messed up the last season, but thank God for Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones, it's based something like Seven Wonders going down to Two Lost Mountains. Seven Wonders is season 1, Six Stones is season 2.
Yeah.
1 book per season. Thank you, Game of Thrones. So I increasingly get inquiries for TV shows more so than movies these days.
Game of Thrones, changed the way everyone views stories, I guess you could say.
Sure did.
Yeah. I'm interested to know, though, in the midst of all this, we got a short story, the Chinese Splashdown. How did that come about? Like, was that because you just got a bit stuck with, the big story and just wanted a side path, just to keep your craft sharp, or is this just, a great idea you had?
Sometimes when I'm on a book tour, you're going from, book signings to television studios and back to your hotel. And you're often sort of amped up. And I had the idea for Jack West Jr. and the Chinese Splashdown on the last book tour. And I knew with Two Lost Mountains, without spoiling for people, but Jack is going to have to do something about an object on the surface of the moon. And I just wanted to have this totally impossible task that he has to complete. And there is this thing, this sort of alien altar on the moon. And so with the Chinese Splashdown short story, I thought, well, I'm going to do this in the Two Lost Mountains anyway. And it gets prefaced in Three Secret Cities. And so I thought, well, why don't I just have this little side short story adventure? I always assume it's the big fans who are going to read the short stories. The general mass readership probably won't. So it always has to exist as a little side departure so it can't be mandatory for everybody to read it. But you'll get a little extra from that. And it gets, as you've read Two Lost Mountains, the Splashdown does get a mention in it. Yeah. But I have to really tread a fine line that if someone hasn't read Chinese Splashdown, it doesn't affect Two Lost Mountains. And it's a story that has to go in a circle and come back to where it began in that way. But it was still a pretty fun story, and it had the Aero sub in it, which if you don't know what an Aero sub is, look it up. It's phenomenal. They're real.
Just one last question here for you, Matthew. We obviously big fans of your writing, so we spent the whole time talking about your craft. But I do want to know what you're driving over there in LA.
I am driving a Mercedes-Benz C63 AMG, which if you're a car fan, it's the car that Jeremy Clarkson on Top Gear said that some mad German decided to put a 6-litre V8 into a mid-sized car. It's you like your cars, boys?
Yeah.
What are you driving?
Me? Obviously, it's a bit different when you're in charge of a regional newspaper. You have to kind of live within your means. So I'm in a 2010 VE Commodore with stretch timing chains and 2 blown O2 sensors at the moment. And
I thought the SS Ute might be your car.
Well, until the ATO classifies that as a farm implement, then maybe I can't really justify that much of an asset write-off at this stage. But
where is your
tax planning?
Where's your Back to the Future car? Is it still in Australia?
The DeLorean, Clancy. Yeah.
I
under a tarp somewhere.
It's my buddy in Canberra is tooling around Canberra in my DeLorean.
I've seen it.
Bless him, just to keep it running, keep the engine running. I had the D in Australia for 10 years, so I had to convert it to right-hand drive.
Right.
And it took so long. I'll be damned if I was going to convert it back to left-hand drive when I moved over here. So I'm happy. My buddy keeps it running. We actually spoke to a car modification company who may want to put an electric engine in it, which I think is a great idea because beautiful car, but it's not the fastest car in the world.
Just one last question for our readers. What have you got in the bag in the back of the Benz? What are you gaming with now in terms of your golf?
Oh dear. This is an admission. I have the PXGs.
Right, yeah.
The Parsons clubs.
Yeah, they really are the DeLorean of golf clubs, aren't
they? That's a really good way of putting it. They are the DeLorean of golf clubs. And I must say, I got them in 2016, and I haven't felt like buying new irons ever since then.
Yeah, that's good.
They're the best irons I've ever hit. Yeah, you know me well.
And
I write and I golf. Write and I golf.
Yeah.
And what are you playing off?
Yeah, that was my next question.
Over there.
My handicap is 3.7 right now.
That's pretty tidy. What's the slope rating of the club that you're playing at over there? Is it
I think it's about
is it a tough course?
133.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. It's
it's a bit hard.
I get in, whenever I get this question, especially in front of a live audience, I get in trouble because somebody, usually in the front row, says, "Stop playing golf and finish the last Jack West book." And I try to tell them that the golf is good for mental health. I literally sit in a room by myself for long hours at a time. Yeah. So it's good for me to get out in the sun and socialize with human beings.
Well, fast cars, long hours playing golf, and action books. I think everyone would aspire to a life like that in Los Angeles.
I reckon you'd be really good to play golf with if you're playing that fast too, real fast. There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than slow golf.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks for joining us today, Matthew. We look forward to the new book, and we look forward to
it's a good one
in the near future seeing Los Angeles bring these books to life on the screen.
Guys, thank you so much for having me.
No worries.
Love your work.
Thanks, Matt. Bye.